All right. We should we should be live, folks. This is this week's Q&A live teaching session, just to give a little extra insight, teaching, explanation, and sometimes just a reminder of the things that we've been learning. If you're in my courses, of course, I have a website, morrismodel.com. Our company's Morris Education, Morris Model Education, and we basically provide online tutoring and 10-week math courses to help people get a good foundation, fill in learning gaps, and just kind of get people confident in their ability to learn. That's really the goal, and to be any kind of resource and help to homeschool families and traditional school families. It's we all have different needs, and we need to be able to adapt to the needs of our kids and really those situations in the family. So that's the purpose behind all this. Let's go ahead and get into a few different topics. So I obviously have people in our Math Made Simple, our Money Made Simple, which is our personal finance course. Also have our Algebra Made Simple, which is probably our most popular program. And so we have people doing different things. I'm going to cover a few different topics today. And I'm going to start with my Algebra Made Simple clients. We've been working on the process, which is really, it can be a little lengthy depending on type of polynomial you're looking at. But we've been looking at how to factor polynomials, various kinds. And specifically what we looked at this week is how to do what's called solving a quadratic equation. Now, quadratic means a polynomial that has a degree of 2. If it's a polynomial or quadratic equation, then you are going to see an equal sign. I mean, that's the definition of equation. If there's no equal sign, don't call it an equation. Maybe call it an expression or something like that. So I'm going to start with a really basic one that is from this week's assignment, from this week's content, and then we're going to look at we're going to look at what to do when you actually have to factor it in a full sense. So if you take a look at the very first one, you actually have half the work done for you if you're working on this week's solving by factoring material. And I'm just going to bring it on my board here in just a second so you get an idea. This is awesome because they already did the hardest part for you. It's already in what's called factored form. So I just kind of wrote it on my board. I'm going to bring it up on the screen for you guys to check out. So this is kind of an example like number 1. You see k plus 1 times k minus 5. To be honest with you, I got my light on. I usually use that, but I might move it just so it doesn't glare so much today. I think you can still see me. Okay, yeah, I think you still see me. So notice you have 2 factored. It's already factored. This used to be a quadratic trinomial, but sometimes they'll give it to you in what's called factored form, and it's set equal to 0. Okay, the reason they call that is because we want to know where the line that when you graph it would be at 0 on the y-axis. What would the x be at 0? That's called an x-intercept. So that's why it's set equal to 0. But to solve it, it's actually quite simple. You set each factor equal to 0 and solve, right? So if you see x, excuse me, not x, k, this is k, k plus 1, I'm going to set that equal to 0. So I just took that first one that's in the parentheses, and I solved that like a one-step equation, okay? Minus 1 on both sides. So I know one of my solutions is k equals -1. If you were to graph this, you'd see a parabola, which is a U-shaped graph, going through the x-axis right at -1. If you come over here, the other factor was k minus 5. So I just set that one equal to 0. And then there's another equation I can solve. That'll give me my second solution. Remember, quadratics have 2 solutions, okay? 2 solutions. So there you go. I mean, this is as simple of an example as I could give you. You just take each one of those binomials, really, that's in the parentheses, and you set them equal to 0 and solve, okay? Now, Chris, that doesn't look too bad. But here's the thing. I'm looking at the work. I'm looking at the problems that you gave me, and they don't all look that simple. In fact, they usually start with not 2 parentheses like this, but they actually have what are called binomials, right? It's gonna be trinomials. So I want to show you an example of this because this can happen, and I've seen this on like standardized tests, and they like to kind of throw this your way to see how you respond. So I'm going to go ahead and share it with you right now. Okay. Take a look at this example. So this is basically it's got the makings of a quadratic trinomial. Okay. We got n squared plus 7n plus 15. But notice this one isn't equal to 0 like the other ones we typically did in class. It's equal to 5. Oh man, what do I do when that happens? Well, that's nothing to be scared about. You can do an inverse operation, move the 5 over, and then it'll be equal to 0. So what do you mean, Chris? Well, what I mean is if I subtract both sides by 5, since that's a positive 5, I can do that as long as I'm doing an inverse operation, going from one side of the equal sign to the other. Okay. What that's going to do is make this equal 0 on the right side, and 15 take away 5 is 10. Everything else I'm going to leave exactly the same. Okay. So boom, one move just like this. And I have what you're probably used to doing at this point. It's called a quadratic trinomial. You got 1, 2, 3 terms, the degree is 2, and we know how to factor those. We've done a lot of this, and we're going to do it again now. So remember, this is an equation. So not only are we looking to get the factors, but then we have to set it equal to 0, solve the factors. But let's do first things first. First, we got to factor it. Remember, with trinomials, you're looking for what multiplies to the outside, two numbers that also add to the inside, right? Has to multiply to 10, but it has to add to 7. Start with the multiplying piece. Okay. Some of you guys are trying to start with the adding piece. It's going to take you longer than it needs to. Start with the multiplying piece. What times what equals 10? The numbers that probably came to mind for you, I'm guessing, is 5 and 2. 5 times 2 is 10. That's probably the most popular factors. So you need to test that. Okay, 5 and 2, that does equal 10 if I multiply it. What's 5 plus 2? Does that equal what we need? Does that equal 7? Just so happens, hey, our very first try, it checked out. It multiplies to 10, it adds to 7. 5 and 2 do. So what we do is we just do 2 parentheses. All right, this main course, I'm going to have my marker starting to wear out on me. But if it's a positive 5 and a positive 2, you put that in as plus 5 and plus 2, right? And this is how we factor it. It's kind of hard to see. Hopefully that'll look a little better, but you got two binomials, right? If it's a positive 5, I say n plus 5. If it's positive 2, say n plus 2. So then we're going to take it a step further. You got two factors, and they're equal to 0. So you're going to take each one and set it equal to 0 to solve. Well, as you probably noticed from the previous example, if it's just one variable plus a number or one variable minus a number, basically the answer is going to be the opposite of what you see in the parentheses. So if it's n plus 5, I can already tell you, you probably can too, it's going to be n equals negative 5, okay, as the solution. If it's n plus 2, that means the opposite of plus is minus. So the solution will be minus 2, okay? And we're done. We've solved this quadratic equation by factoring, but we had to do a little bit of prep work. I call it prep work, right? Okay, you ever heard your mom tell you to like set the table? Honey, it's time for dinner. Go wash your hands and put the plates out and the forks and lay the fork on top of the napkin, or maybe it's the other way around. I don't know. I don't think we set the table enough when I was growing up, but you kind of get my point. You got to do a little prep work before it's time to eat, right? So sometimes you're not given an equation set equal to 0 like we need. That's no big deal. Just subtract or add whatever the inverse operation is, and then it'll be set up. The table will be set for the eating. Okay, that's what it is. So moving along, that was a little bit of what we discussed. Really, a lot of it of what we discussed on the Algebra Made Simple session this week. If you're also in that program, you'll probably notice that we're doing some critical thinking material for you. So like as you get toward the last, I don't know, 3 weeks or so, it's a 10-week course. That's when we're trying to move from like, here's how you do all the little steps, to how do you respond no matter what I throw your way. Okay. And so the thinking, the problem solving, the skills you've learned in the past, those are important. They're going to come into play, but also just how you respond to maybe questions that were worded or presented to you in kind of weird ways, or ways you're not super familiar with. Can you kind of read and make sense of the material? So if, like, for example, you might get a series of questions where they simply give you an expression and they say evaluate the expression. You didn't seem to have too much trouble with this in class, but I'm going to bring it up. Let's say you had 7m plus 3mn, and then they tell you, well, tell me what this would equal when m is equal to 8 and when n is equal to 14, for example. And this is just one example of many that you could see. This is a very ACT style standardized test question, okay? So here's the expression. The expression is just a term plus another term, or minus. You'll see operations, but you won't see any. Hello, Angela. Good to see you today. You won't really see any equal signs, really. They're going to have some extra information right here where there's some equal signs, but this is the part that you're really using. It's your template. You want to substitute in, okay? You want to plug in anything that that they give you. So if m equals 8 and n equals 14, that's no longer a mystery to us, okay? Usually algebra, you have variables because they're a mystery. You got to figure out what those variables are. And so even if you're taking my Algebra Made Simple, hey, Angela, and hopefully Faith can check this out. I gave you a little taste of algebra at the end of our session, and I talked about how variables are just things that we don't know yet, and we're trying to figure out what's there. It's kind of like watching those old school TV shows, and it was like, hey, what's behind door number 2? Or do you want to pick door number 5? And it could be something as great as a trip to Hawaii or something, or it could just be like something really pitiful, like, I don't know, a coffee mug. Okay. So they always had to pick the right one. Okay. So think of like a variable, kind of like a mystery box. We want to know what's in it, but we don't know yet until they tell you. So if you look right here, they're telling you, well, by the way, M behind this box, it's really 8 and this is really 14. So I'm going to substitute 8 where I see the M's, and I'm going to substitute 14 where I see the N's, okay? So when we substitute in algebra, get in the habit of using parentheses, okay? Get in the habit. You use parentheses as a reminder to yourself that you want to multiply what's next to them. As a little algebra tip, okay, for those of y'all who aren't quite there yet, but I'm just giving you little seeds to think about when you do run into this subject. Anytime you see a number or anything in parentheses, and then you look directly to the left, right? See how this one says 7 parentheses 8? They're lazy when you get to algebra. They don't put the time symbol there. It's understood that multiplication is occurring right here, okay? It's just something you're going to have to get used to, all right? It's kind of like knowing your quirks of your people in your family. When they do this, they really mean this. Okay, so the quirks of algebra is that you got a number next to a set of parentheses. You need to know, take it to the bank, baby. That's multiplication, okay? So 7, 8. If you're doing your times tables, by the way, if you're taking my Math Made Simple program, we're doing a little crossover today. 7 times 8, if you practice it, you're going to figure out it's 56. Okay, for those working on multiplication. Now, this right here, part of this I would know in my head and part of this I wouldn't. Usually when you're going over times tables, they stop at 12. So knowing what something times 14 is, you might not know that. I say just use a calculator on that. But I could tell you 3 times 8 is 24. Hopefully you remember that. We were doing our three times tables. So that's really 24. And I'll just bring down the parentheses 14. And so this is a process we call simplifying. You got all these operations happening. I say do 2 numbers at a time, figure out what that equals, maybe do 2 more numbers at a time, do what that equals. So we're really just multiplying here. 7 parentheses 8 is 7 times 8, that's 56. 3 parentheses 8 is 3 times 8, that's 24. And then I just brought down the parentheses 14 because honestly, I got to look that one up. We don't take the time to memorize up to 14 most of the time. And so you can do it by hand. I'm going to cheat a little bit. And when you get to high school, middle school, 8th grade, you'll notice most math teachers allow you to use your calculator at that point because some of these numbers would take all day if we had to do everything by hand. We're trying to get the basic concept across. So I'm going to take out my calculator. I'm going to do 14 times 24. Turns out that comes out to 336. So I'm going to simplify this a little bit more. Say 336, bring down the plus 56. And I'm almost home, baby. I'm almost home. 24 times 14 is 336. All I have to do is add 56 to that number. So while I'm at it, I'm just going to go a step further. Take 336, add 56 to it. Turns out the final answer is 392. 392. But this is a real fundamental pre-algebra and early algebra 1 in the year kind of concept where they'll give you an expression like this and they'll have some variables attached. Just know that if you got a 3, an M, and an N right next to each other, it's really saying 3 times M, times N. If you see 7M next to each other, that's really saying 7 times M. And so if M is 8, you can replace M with 8. If N is 14, you can go ahead, use the same template here, but replace the M with 8 and the N with 14, just like that, using parentheses. Multiply it, add it, do what it says, and you can evaluate it. It's called evaluating an expression, okay? So that right there, honestly, that is something you're going to do the rest of high school. That is what you're going to do if you're taking a college entrance exam. You're going to see those kinds of questions. If you're taking like I had one girl who was trying to study to become an electrician. She's in her 30s, hadn't looked at this stuff in like, who knows, 15, 18 years, something like that. And these kinds of questions were posed to her. And so sometimes they'll use these kinds of exercises just to kind of measure your thinking, your sense of numbers for a particular career field where that would be handy and come into play. Okay. So the truth is at this age, you don't really know where God has you. You don't know where you're going to end up going. I definitely didn't when I was in high school, but there's some things I learned along the way. I'm glad I remembered them because lo and behold, I ended up needing them. Okay. One other thing I wanted to share as far as the quick problem solving, this is something that you do have to have been taught, and hopefully you'll remember, but it pops up basically every year. I don't care if you're in geometry, algebra 2, trig, or calculus, pre-cal. Take a look at this. A basic sense of the properties of exponents is definitely something worth going over. Okay, so if you're looking right here, you see in parentheses, you have what are called bases. Bases are numbers that are being raised to a power. So even though it doesn't seem like it, 4 is being raised to the power of 1, even though they just have a 4 there. It's understood to have a power of 1. X is to the power of 2, y to 3. But then outside the parentheses, you see another power, another exponent. It's 2. Well, if you see a power just hanging out in the corner outside parentheses, it's called the power to a power property. The rule is you have to actually distribute or multiply the exponent on the outside of the parentheses times every power that's inside the parentheses. Now, what most kids don't realize is that even though it's not visible, that 4 technically has a power of 1. So you're going to have to multiply that 2 times its power as well. So if I'm going to go ahead and do that right now, that's going to leave me with 4 squared, because 2 times 1 is 2. That'll be x to the power of 4 and y to the power of 6. And here's where we are, right? You're almost done after doing that power to a power property. But here's the thing. If you have an actual known base that's not a variable, meaning it's unknown, we know that 4 is the value. It's 4 to the power of 2. You might as well, and we're going to expect you to go ahead and evaluate that. 4 squared really means 4 times 4, and 4 times 4 is 16. So we're going to change that to 16, but the unknowns, the variables, we don't know what they are really. So all we can do is leave it like that. X to the power of 4 times y to the power of 6. Right here, I'll circle it so you see it. This is where we are. Okay. All right. So that's a little taste of some of the different types of questions that you're going to see on the algebra diagnostic. It's just a chance to kind of see and measure what you got, what your problem solving skill, critical thinking skills are, things like that. Now, if you're taking my Math Made Simple, I'm telling you, and I'm just gonna kind of talk to you for a second. Right now, depending on the grade level, I tailor how I do it. If you're like 5th grade, 6th grade, around that area, I have a little alarm bell that goes off as for me in my experience. Ding, 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 ding. If you're not real good on your multiplication tables and you're in 5th grade and 6th grade, that's kind of the warning years. There's still time to correct it. But a lot of times, if you don't get your multiplication facts down packed by 5th or 6th grade, a lot of times you never end up really learning them. I've just seen that pattern after about 17 years or however long I was. Maybe I'm going a little long there. Many years of doing this. Okay, maybe 12 years. Okay. Because by the time you get to pre-algebra level content, which is really like 7th grade and on, you're going to have to be able to recall your multiplication facts to do almost everything. I mean, you got factor polynomials, you're reducing rational expressions. There's so many areas that you have to learn in algebra, in geometry, and in the successive math subjects. If you don't have a good grasp of your multiplication facts, it's going to make it way more difficult. And what happens is that your student is going to spend all their mental capacity trying to figure out what 8 times 5 is. And by the time they figure that out, they have like no energy left for the actual application that we were trying to teach them as far as the algebra, right? They need to be able to quickly be like 8 times 5 is 40. Boom. So they can put their energy towards the new thing that we're trying to do with that. Okay. So my point is this: I'm spending time making sure that we're getting better at those multiplication tables. And it's something, frankly, that you have to memorize. You have to drill it. You have to go over it. You have to get to the point where you can recall it without having to think that hard. That's how you know you have learned it. Okay. So I talked about website. Timestables.com is a great one. They have worksheets, games, flip cards, time tests. They have all kinds of things you can do to just drill and go over and make it fun and keep it going. So right now you're working on your 6 times tables, and I pushed your child to work on their 7s as well. Did pretty good with your 4s and 5s and 3s. There's like about, I don't know, 3 or 4 that I'm noticing that we're having a hard time remembering every time, but the rest of them we're getting pretty quick. So that's good. We're making progress. The needle is moving, but we just got to add on to it. All right. Going on to the 6s and the 7s. Okay. You got to be able to say 3 times 6 is 18. You got to be able to say, 6 times 7 is 42. You got to be able to say 8 times 6 is 48. You got to be able to just rattle it off so that that bank of knowledge is there, and you can draw on that to concentrate on the new things that you're going to want to tackle and problem solve as you move along. Okay. Math builds on itself. And so there's not too much to show teaching wise. It's just giving you perspective as to why this is so important. And I always get alarms if it's fifth and sixth grade and we still are struggling with that. I'm just trying to save you pain and heartache coming down. You're going to have tears. You're going to feel like your kid isn't competent when they really are. They just don't have that bank of knowledge drilled into them that the other kids do. And so they're getting stuck down here where, it's just what it is. Okay. So that's kind of what I want to say there. So moving subjects real quick. I'm moving along kind of quickly today because I've got a jam-packed schedule. We have people, of course, taking our personal finance course. Great option. Well, I think it's just one of the best investments you could make in your teenager because money, issues, that just affects everything. It affects marriage. It affects families, generations. You can have blessings and cursings, right? Depending on how you treat that subject. And so what we were talking about, and I wanted to micro it, we've been talking macro. When I say macro, I mean like last week we were doing investments. And so you're learning about Roth IRAs, traditional IRAs, stock markets, mutual funds, the difference between saving and investing and the nuances and the time frames and really kind of a lot of information that frankly a lot of adults still don't understand, right? And so that was more of a macro lesson. I wanted to do the opposite of that this week. Because I don't want your kid to be overwhelmed, but practically, I want to talk about decision making in the context of something that they're going to have to deal with probably really soon. I mean, when I say really soon, I mean the next 7 years, probably, which is just running a place. A lot of times, the first time your kid lives outside the home, it's during the college years, right? Even if you stay home for like maybe the first year or two, a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times, people are like, hey, but by my third year of college, I don't need to get my own place, or let's move in with my buddy. Let's get a roommate. Let's do this thing. Right. And so this is a practical thing that, they can grab onto at this age, but it can help them begin to exercise their financial thinking muscles and learn how to, or at least think through how to make a good decision there. And so I had your child brainstorm just the kind of place that they think they want to live, and maybe after graduation from high school, or maybe during college, or maybe shortly after college, right? Think about your personality. You want to be close to the city? Are you like an outdoorsman? You rather be in the country? And so we kind of looked at, what the rent would be right now. Theoretically in those situations. And we talked about, some of the criteria that you would make. One of the things that came up was something we call the 30% rule. Now, if you remember my budgeting section, we basically spent some time in savings talking about a budget. My suggestion was to shoot for 25%, 30%, 25%, you're in that same ballpark. But if you can go a little lower and you figure it out, obviously that leaves you more money. But we'll just go with 30% for the sake of argument. Under the 30% rule, it's basically saying, look, you don't have any business spending more on housing than 30% of your overall income each month, right? So for example, let's say you're a teacher working at a school, you're making about 40,000 a year. You want to get 30% of that income, gross income. That's about $12,000. I think it comes down to a year. Well, per month, divide that by 12, that's $1,000. So you basically have $1,000 a month that you can spend on rent. But that's really not true. I should say $1,000 a month on housing. So it's not just rent. It's rent, it's utilities, it's cable, sewer, it's anything, rentals or insurance. It's all the expenses that go into your renting expenses, right? And so that means you don't want to get an apartment or rent a house and that costs $1,000 a month as your lease. That's too much. You're going to spend all of your available money, 30% of your income, on just the rent, and you're not allocating, your monthly bills that have to deal with the rent on top of that, right? And so we discussed, that you might want to shoot for, I don't know, $600 to $700 for a place to live, so that the rest of that money, $1,000, can go towards the utilities. A lot of times your utilities and all those expenses might end up being about $225, something like that, when it's all said and done. That's not even counting cable and Wi-Fi and internet, so it's probably a little low, to be honest with you. And it varies a little bit from city to city. I gave you a website. I think it's called Numbero. Let me see if I can pull that up. It's in the email, but in the email, it gives you it's awesome because it tells you basically how much it costs to live in any city in the United States. Breaks down food, breaks down utilities, breaks down average cost, average income. It's really cool. And so we're going to do an exercise where you're comparing rental options and helping them think through how much money you'd really be able to spend. And so you don't like get house broke, even if it's something like renting. Another topic we talked about was moving costs. So obviously you have your everyday month or every month, I guess, monthly expenses. But if you're moving, that can be expensive or cheaper depending on what you do in your situation, right? So you might want to hire a moving company to help get all your stuff. If you got a lot of things or you're going cross country, it's going to get a lot more expensive. If you're just moving in town, you can get a few buddies to help you run a truck. It might be $100 for the day, U-Haul or something like that. But on top of that, you depending on if you're renting a house from an individual owner versus an apartment complex, things can be expensive or not as much expensive. Like a lot of people want first and last month's rent up front. If your rent $700, you're talking 1,000, 1,400, 1,400, excuse me, dollars up front that you got to just pay. That's not counting a security deposit. Sometimes they want a security. I mean, that could be anything. Let's say it's $500. And that's basically, hey, give me $500. That's what the apartment's going to say. And if you are a good tenant and you don't ruin and destroy the place, you'll get that money back. But if you put a hole in the wall or crash a baseball through the window, like we're going to use that money to make the repairs. So it's just a way for them to cover their butt. But we talked about, since we already previously reviewed credit, how that works, how to get good credit. How a lot of times, if you have good credit and you can kind of point that, sometimes tenants are willing to drop the first month or last month requirement, or maybe lower the security deposit, that you can save some money on your moving costs when you bring that up. And you just have to ask. It just depends, right? Another good tip, May. I always say move in May, move in June, especially if you're thinking apartment complexes. And why is that? Well, college kids, people are graduating, moving home, moving on to jobs. A lot of times you have apartment complexes that need tenants. And so they get really willing to give you good deals if they need renters. They'll even waive your first month's, security deposit maybe, or that first month's rent, last month's rent goes bye-bye. They don't even care. Sometimes if they're really desperate, they'll say, move in. We won't charge you anything as long as you, check our other boxes, and they might not even charge you rent until a month too. I think that happened with me when I moved in my first place. So, I mean, that's could be as much as $3,000 you flat out save if you can kind of be intentional about that. And so these are just some of the things. I'm just talking through the highlights on that. So I'm not going to say much more. You have your assignment emailed to you, or at least you're about to, when it comes to that topic. But I just wanted to hit some of the main concepts there, right? This is something practical you'll have to do in a matter of years, and it's a good opportunity to stretch your financial decision-making muscles and make sure you get informed so that the good decisions can happen. A lot of times it's just a misinformation. You don't have the information in the first place. Anyway, that's all I got to say on this one. I'm keeping this one short and sweet. We're a little under 30 minutes today. We covered algebra topics. We covered factoring and solving by factoring, some just critical thinking skills, some multiplication, the necessity for that, also some personal finance in the areas of renting your own place to live, something that's very usually something that teenagers can grab a hold of, and they know that's kind of their next step, and they can kind of make sense of that a little easier. All right. I love you guys. Catch you on the next one. Check the replay if you didn't get a chance to watch this live, and I'll see you soon. Peace.